Hi there, my name is Jackson Ham, and this is my presentation on Expo. So, what is Expo? Well, to answer that question, first we need to talk about what React Native is. And quite simply, React Native is an open source UI framework that runs in JavaScript that is used for building mobile applications. It was developed by Meta. And so, Expo, within the framework of React Native, we can read on the right there, straight from the Expo documentation. It is an open source framework for apps that run natively on Android, iOS, and the web. So we got some frameworkception going on. Expo is a framework within the React Native framework. It's not affiliated officially with React Native, but what is interesting is if you go to the React Native documentation, you can see in setting up the development environment, the first thing they tell you is if you're new to mobile development, the easiest way to get started is with Expo Go. So it's not directly related to React Native or Meta. It is its own separate entity. It is still highly encouraged by even the creators of React Native to go and use Expo. So Expo is somewhat of it's a toolkit, really. You have Expo, you have Expo Go, you have the Expo Dev client, and you have EAS. So I'll talk about each of those separately. So Expo, like I said, is a framework. It's a feature-rich development environment, including components, packages, the ability to compile your application and test it in real time, and it also allows you to deploy through Expo. So tied to Expo is Expo Go, and this is the application that is free to download. It's open source. It's on the App Store and the Play Store. And when you are running a Expo application, or when you're developing it, you're able to open up a local area network that is able to be accessed by your Expo Go application on your phone. And what this allows you to do is compile the code that you are developing and see exactly, well, somewhat exactly like what it will look like on a phone when it is fully compiled and deployed. Super useful because it allows you to see what's happening in real time, and that's always useful for things like debugging, as you'll get error messages if you click on things that are broken, and it just overall is a major help to the development service. Next, you have the Expo Dev client. So like I said, Expo Go is open source, and sometimes you just need to develop outside of the bounds of Expo. Expo, like I said, is a framework, and when you're developing in it, you kind of have to conform to the rules of Expo. Luckily, though, Expo Go, being open source, has been adapted to be a shell app for arbitrary React Native projects, meaning that the software that allows you to hook up your local area network to your phone and view what is going on has been adapted to work outside of the framework of Expo. It allows you to use Expo, the Expo Go app, to develop outside the bounds of Expo, like I say. And the caveat is that it removes a lot of the features of Expo, such as being able to deploy or test through the Expo services, Expo web services. So finally, we have EAS. And like I said, sometimes you just need to develop outside of the Expo application service, and I'll explain why. Expo, what it does is it allows you to combine a lot of the complicated issues with working separately for Apple and Android, and it combines all of the APIs and everything together into one file. And so instead of having to develop separately, you're able to develop for both of them. So there's a bit of abstraction going on when you're working in an Expo project. And because of that, certain things like external libraries will no longer work because you have changed how React Native is working and how it's being compiled. Expo uses a compiler called Turtle. So what EAS does is it's Expo. Like I said, it's a separate entity, and so they need a source of revenue, and this is it. They saw the problem where people would have to, after developing an Expo for a while, they'd hit an issue where they need to develop separately and access the native APIs or download an external library, and they'd have to eject Expo and suddenly shoulder all the burden of the complications and download all these packages, and all of a sudden they weren't working in Expo. And so Expo said, okay, well, we'll come up with a solution, and EAS is their solution to that, where it allows you to run something called Expo Prebuild, which will go and it'll compile it using the native libraries and the React Native code, the external libraries, and then it builds it into its app binaries, and then you can submit those app binaries straight to the Play Store or the App Store. And so it allows you to do what used to be done in a very complicated fashion all through Expo. Very useful. So some of the pros are that it abstracts away native complications, combining everything into one file. Just like I've been saying, the environment for testing, it's an environment for testing, compiling, and deploying, which is all very useful tools for quickly getting your application off the ground and maybe even getting a revenue source going or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And it has built-in components for quicker development, things that work on both Apple and Android. It just allows you to build out these components at a much higher rate than if you were using bare bones React Native. But that can also be an issue because it limits your flexibility in comparison to bare React Native. You are no longer able to access those native APIs, those native components within each of those mobile devices. Another issue is that Expo, being a framework, may cause bloat and performance issues. This is getting better. Expo is getting better at detecting what packages and such that you're using from Expo and what you aren't, and including them when they're necessary and not including when they aren't. But it's still an issue because all frameworks come with some form of bloat. There can be also compatibility issues with the native APIs themselves. For instance, I'm building an app in React Native using Expo, and there's a component specifically called Safe Area View. Very useful because it allows you to detect where the status bar of a phone is. That's where your clock and your battery and everything are displayed, and you don't want to be displaying stuff behind that. And so Safe Area View just makes sure that nothing is displayed under that status bar. But for whatever reason, it doesn't work in Android. So there's just some compatibility issues within Expo itself, even though it's been built to kind of remove those compatibility issues. Likewise, there's certain buttons or certain features on each individual phone that you may not be able to access because you're using Expo. So those are all things to consider as you go forward in your application building. But I think Expo is a very useful and it's a good tool for beginners to React Native and to learning how to really develop in the mobile space using React Native. So thank you for listening.